For 8 long years, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dismissed Ben Shapiro's debate invitations as nothing more than political catcalling. But when she finally forced him under oath inside a congressional hearing room, she discovered a devastating truth. The man she had been running from had spent nearly a decade quietly doing his homework. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned into her microphone on the raised dais of the House Oversight Committee hearing room. Her voice carried the practiced, rhythmic cadence of a politician who had elevated the 5-minute questioning round into a viral art form. Now, 3 terms into her congressional career, she was the most followed member of Congress on every major social media platform. She was fully prepared to do what she did best: transform a procedural hearing into a spectacular internet moment. Mr. Shapiro, you run a media company valued at $220 million that profits from division and misinformation, she began, her gold hoop earrings catching the bright fluorescent lights of the hearing room. Her eyes were locked firmly on the witness table below. You are not an economist. You are not a policy expert. You are not an academic. You are a professional provocateur who makes $10 million a year, telling working-class Americans that their problems are their own fault. The fact that my Republican colleagues invited you to testify on income inequality is like inviting a fox to testify on henhouse security. She did not pause. Pausing was only for people who needed time to think about their next words, and she always knew exactly what she was going to say. In 2018, you challenged me to a debate and offered $10,000. I declined. I compared it to catcalling, because that is exactly what it was. A man with bad intentions demanding my time and feeling entitled to a response. You have spent 8 years attacking me on your podcast. Every time you say my name, your downloads spike. I am your content, Mr. Shapiro. I am your business model. So let us be honest about why you are here today. You are not here to discuss income inequality. You are here to get a clip. Up in the gallery, the progressive staffers nodded in unison. 3 women seated in the second row wore matching Tax the Rich t-shirts. An MSNBC producer was already typing time codes into her laptop for the segment that would surely air at 8 o'clock that evening. This was destined to be the clip of the week. AOC destroys conservative witness. They anticipated 3 million views by midnight and a massive fundraising email campaign by morning. Down at the witness table, Ben Shapiro sat calmly in a navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a yarmulke. At 5'9", he looked relatively small behind the heavy wooden desk. Dwarfed by the raised dais, where the committee members loomed over him like judges. In front of him rested a thin laptop and a massive stack of documents, meticulously organized with colored tabs. Blue, red, green, yellow. Each tab marked a specific section, with the absolute precision of a man who had graduated from Harvard Law School and spent 2 decades preparing ironclad arguments for a living. He had brought no entourage. He had no communications team whispering in his ear. He had no legal counsel by his side. He simply had his laptop, a stack of paper, and 20 years of relentless debate experience that had molded him into the most feared verbal combatant in conservative media. When the Congresswoman finally finished her opening barrage, the entire room held its breath, waiting for Shapiro to do what witnesses almost always did when under fire: stammer, deflect, or look desperately at their lawyers for salvation. But Shapiro did not stammer. He did not look around for help. He looked directly up at Ocasio-Cortez with an expression that was neither angry nor defensive. It was the calm, calculated look of a chess grandmaster who had been waiting 8 years for his opponent to finally sit down at the board. "Congresswoman," he began. His voice was incredibly fast. It was not a nervous fast, but a machine-like velocity, the speed of someone who formed complete paragraphs in his mind and delivered them in single, unbroken breaths. You have used 90 seconds of your 5-minute questioning round to attack my character instead of asking me a single question. That is your prerogative. But since you mentioned that I am your content and you are mine, I will grant you that. Let me point out one fundamental difference between us. He opened his laptop screen. When I talk about you, I bring data. When you talk about me, you bring adjectives. He looked back up at the dais. So, shall we start with the 25,000 jobs you killed in your own district? Or the $35,000 dress you didn't pay for? The hearing room physically shifted. It was not quite a gasp, but a sound much quieter and heavier, the collective realization of 200 people simultaneously understanding that this was not going to be a normal congressional hearing. Shapiro pulled up a document on his laptop and seamlessly connected it to the hearing room's main display. Every screen in the room illuminated with the official header of a House Ethics Committee report. July 25, 2025. Shapiro read aloud, enunciating each syllable for the C-SPAN cameras. The House Ethics Committee, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, entirely bipartisan and unanimous, released a 26-page report on your attendance at the 2021 Met Gala. He looked at the document. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's conduct was inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct. Inconsistent, meaning you violated them. He tapped a key, and a photograph appeared on the monitors. It was the famous, inescapable image of Ocasio-Cortez ascending the steps of the Met Gala in a pristine white gown. The words, "Tax the Rich," painted in bold red letters down the back. A $35,000 a plate event, Shapiro continued. The most expensive charity gala in the world. Let's walk through exactly what happened. In May 2021, Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue, with a net worth of approximately $35 million, personally called the designer and asked her to, quote, dress AOC for the Met. He brought the Ethics Committee report back onto the screen. The designer made you a brand new, custom couture gown from scratch. She provided a handbag, shoes, and jewelry. You received hair, makeup, transportation services, and a ready room. Your boyfriend, who was not your spouse and therefore not covered under house gift rules, received free admission to a $35,000 event. Shapiro turned a physical page in his binder. Now, your staff attempted to pay for some of this. Let me describe how. Your campaign staffer compared the rental value of a one-of-a-kind custom couture dress made specifically for you by a designer personally commissioned by Anna Wintour to dresses available on Rent the Runway, a mass-market clothing rental website. And based on that absurd comparison, you paid $300. He let that number hang in the silent room. $300 for a dress, the Ethics Committee later estimated, was worth over $6,000. That is a 95% discount, Congresswoman. Even on Black Friday, that is impressive. A few stifled laughs echoed from the gallery. Ocasio-Cortez's jaw visibly tightened. But the real issue isn't the dress. Shapiro pressed on. It is the timeline. Because you did not pay that $300 until March 2022, a full 6 months after the event, and you didn't pay the designer for the other expenses, nearly $5,600 for room rentals, car service, shoes, and a bow tie for Mr. Roberts until May 2022, and you only made those payments after the Office of Congressional Ethics began its official investigation. He stared directly at her. The Ethics Committee was very specific about this. I am reading directly from their report. If it were not for the review, it appears that Representative Ocasio-Cortez may not have paid for several thousands of dollars worth of goods and services provided to her. In other words, you weren't going to pay at all until someone started asking questions. The committee ordered you to pay an additional $2,733 to the designer and $250 for your boyfriend's ticket. And they found, unanimously and bipartisan, that you received, quote, impermissible gifts. He paused, not for dramatic effect, but for sheer precision. Congresswoman, tax the rich, was painted on the back of that dress, but the dress was a gift from Condé Nast, a billion-dollar company. The design was a gift from Anna Wintour, a multi-millionaire. The shoes, the jewelry, the hair, the makeup gifts, all from the extremely rich. You didn't pay fair market value for any of it, and you didn't pay at all until investigators came knocking. There is a word for wearing tax the rich while accepting gifts from the rich that you don't pay for. That word is hypocrisy. And in this case, it is not just hypocrisy. It is a formal finding by the United States House Ethics Committee that you violated the rules. Ocasio-Cortez leaned sharply into her microphone. The Ethics Committee specifically found that my violations were not knowing and willful. Correct, Shapiro replied instantly. They said you didn't knowingly break the rules. They also said, and I am reading, she nonetheless received impermissible gifts and must bear responsibility. Impermissible. Their word, not mine. And the fact that you didn't know you were breaking the rules while wearing a dress that cost someone else $6,000 doesn't make it better, Congresswoman. It makes it worse, because it means you didn't even bother to check. Without missing a beat, Shapiro closed the Ethics tab and opened a new one. A detailed map of New York City illuminated the screens, with Long Island City, Queens, highlighted in bright red. Located directly adjacent to Ocasio-Cortez's congressional district, the 14th of February 2019. He stated, Amazon announced it was canceling plans to build its second headquarters, HQ2, in Long Island City, Queens. The deal had been finalized. The architectural plans had been drawn, and then a group of politicians, led forcefully by you, Congresswoman, killed it. He projected the original terms of the deal. Here is what New York was going to get. 25,000 jobs. An average salary of $150,000, that is $3.75 billion in annual wages flowing directly into the boroughs you represent. The total economic impact was an estimated $30 billion over 25 years. Direct investment of $2.5 billion in construction and infrastructure. The estimated new tax revenue for the state was over $10 billion. He clicked to the next slide. Here is what New York was going to give in return. Tax incentives totaling $1.5 billion, spread over 10 years. And these were performance-based, meaning Amazon would receive the incentives only if they actually created the jobs. No jobs, no money. That is not a corporate handout. That is a contract. He looked back up at the dais. But you called it corporate greed. You tweeted, and I have the tweet right here. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world. You celebrated, Congresswoman. You celebrated killing 25,000 high-paying jobs in your own backyard. He pulled up another of her past tweets. Why should corporations that contribute nothing to the pot be in a position to take billions from the public? He read it, mimicking her exact cadence, a surprisingly effective impression. That tweet reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how basic tax incentives work, and I want to take 60 seconds to explain it, because I believe you either didn't understand the deal or you deliberately misrepresented it to your constituents. He was speaking even faster now, hitting his Harvard Law velocity, each sentence building on the previous one like bricks in a wall. You repeatedly said New York was giving away $3 billion to Amazon. That implies the city had $3 billion sitting in a bank account and was writing Amazon a massive check. That is absolutely not what happened. The incentives were a reduction in future taxes on revenue that would not exist without Amazon being there. If Amazon doesn't come, there is no $3 billion. There is no $30 billion. There are no 25,000 jobs. There is nothing. The city wasn't losing money, it was simply declining to collect taxes on economic activity that wouldn't happen without the deal. He swept his gaze across the committee members. Saying New York gave away $3 billion is like saying that by not getting a job that pays $100,000, you somehow saved $100,000 in taxes. The logic is completely backwards, and the congresswoman, who holds a degree in economics from Boston University, either knew this and said it anyway, or didn't know it at all, which is arguably worse. Then Shapiro turned his body toward the gallery. I would like the committee's permission to direct a question to the gallery. The chairman gave a slight nod. Ma, am in the third row. You submitted a written statement to this committee. Would you be willing to share it aloud? A woman stood up. She was 52 years old, her dark hair pulled back neatly, wearing a simple coat that had been carefully pressed for this very occasion. My name is Maria Santos, she began, her voice shaking slightly not from the nerves of public speaking, but from the heavy emotional weight of her story. I live in the Congresswoman S. District in Astoria, Queens. I've lived there for 26 years. I work as a cleaner at a commercial building in Long Island City, the exact same neighborhood where Amazon was going to build. She paused to collect herself. When Amazon announced HQ2, my son, Diego. He was 18 then. Studying logistics at LaGuardia Community College, he applied for a warehouse logistics position. The starting salary was $73,000. It came with benefits, health insurance, and retirement. He got a call back. They scheduled him for a second interview. Her voice cracked, sending a profound ache through the room. Then Amazon pulled out. Diego never got that interview. He graduated, and there was nothing for him. For 6 years, he has been working 2 part-time jobs. One at a warehouse in the Bronx, one doing food deliveries in Manhattan. His combined income is $41,000. No benefits, no health insurance. He is 24 years old, and he still lives with me because he cannot afford rent in the district the Congresswoman represents. Maria Santos looked directly into the eyes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I voted for you. I knocked on doors for your campaign, and you celebrated when Amazon left. You called it a victory, but it wasn't your victory. It was my son's loss. It was 25,000 families' loss. And I want to know, did you ever think about Diego? About the 24-year-old who was one interview away from a real career? The hearing room descended into an absolute, crushing silence. It was not the dramatic, performative silence of a made-for-TV viral moment. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of genuine, human pain in a room entirely filled with people who traded in political performance. Ocasio-Cortez leaned forward, trying to recapture her footing. Ma, I deeply understand your frustration, and I want you to know that Amazon is one of the most exploitative— Congresswoman? Shapiro interrupted, slicing through her talking point. Amazon's minimum wage is $15 an hour, which is exactly the wage you campaigned on. Their average HQ2 salary would have been $150,000. Your constituent Miss Santos's son was offered $73,000. Is $73,000 exploitative? Because the median household income in your district is $53,000. Diego's starting salary would have been 37% higher than the median income of your voters, and you killed it. He pulled up one final slide for this section, a crisp photograph of gleaming, modern glass towers in Arlington, Virginia. This is what HQ2 looks like today. Amazon built it in Virginia instead. 25,000 jobs. Billions in direct investment. They used the exact same deal they offered New York performance-based incentives, construction, infrastructure. Virginia said yes. Virginia's governor signed the bill. Virginia's workers got the jobs. He locked eyes with her again. Today, an Amazon employee in Arlington, Virginia, makes $150,000 and takes the clean metro home to an apartment he can comfortably afford. A warehouse worker in the Bronx makes $19 an hour and takes 2 long buses home to sleep on his mother's couch. Both of those people live in America. Both of those people wanted the exact same opportunity. One of them got it because his state said yes. The other one didn't because his congresswoman said no and then called it a victory. Up in the gallery, Maria Santos was quietly crying. She was not performing for the cameras. She was sitting in a congressional hearing room, finally watching a man she had never met say out loud the painful truth. She had been living for 6 years, that her son's entire life trajectory had been destroyed by a politician's tweet. Shapiro did not linger. He flipped to the green tab in his binder. The color clearly a deliberate choice. February 7th, 2019. Your office published a frequently asked questions document for the Green New Deal. Then, your office hastily deleted it. Then your office claimed it was published in error and was merely an unfinished draft. He held up a thick stack of printed paper. But the internet is forever. Congresswoman, I have it right here, 12 pages, and I would like to read some of it to the committee. He began reading at a merciless, auctioneer-like pace. Economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. Not unable, unwilling. You proposed, in writing, on your official congressional website, using taxpayer money to pay people who simply choose not to work. When pressed on it, your communications director called it a draft, but it was published on your official website, under your name, with your official logo, and officially distributed to the media. He read the next quote: upgrade or replace every building in the United States for state-of-the-art energy efficiency within 10 years. Every single building. There are approximately 130 million housing units in the United States. Upgrading or replacing all of them in 10 years means completing 35,616 buildings every single day. That includes Saturdays, Sundays, Christmas, and the 4th of July. For 10 consecutive years, without a single day off. He moved to the next point. Build out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stops becoming necessary. You proposed eliminating the need for air travel in a massive country that is 2,800 miles from New York to Los Angeles. Hawaii, a state represented by several of your close allies in Congress, is 2,400 miles from the nearest point on the continental United States. Under your genius plan, Hawaiians would either need a very fast train that somehow runs on water, or a very, very long bridge. A wave of laughter rippled through the gallery. Even a few Democratic staffers looked down at their phones, desperately trying to hide their amused expressions. And then, Shapiro said, we get to the phrase, get rid of farting cows. Your exact words. On your official frequently asked questions document, farting cows. That was the level of scientific specificity and rigor in your signature policy proposal. The policy that was supposed to save the entire planet. He set down the stack of paper. When the Green New Deal finally came to a Senate vote in March 2019, Senator Mitch McConnell called your bluff. Do you know how many senators voted yes? 0. Not 0 Republicans. 0 total. 57 senators voted no. 43 all Democrats voted present. They were too embarrassed to vote for it, and too terrified of their radical base to vote against it. Your own political party treated your signature legislation like a live, unpinned grenade. He pulled out one more printed quote. But the most revealing moment came from your own chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, he told a Washington Post reporter, entirely on the record. The interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. We really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. Shapiro let the devastating quote hang in the air. Your chief of staff said the quiet part out loud. The Green New Deal was never actually about the climate. The climate was just the packaging, the radical economic restructuring was the real product. You used the genuine, legitimate concern that millions of Americans have about climate change as a Trojan horse for a socialist economic agenda. And when the Senate finally called your bluff, you got 0 votes. Ocasio-Cortez was gripping the edge of the dais so hard her knuckles were white. Her aide nervously passed her a handwritten note. She ignored it entirely. And it wasn't just Republicans who saw right through it, Shapiro continued, relentless. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the leader of your own party at the time, was asked about the Green New Deal and said, in terms of the Green New Deal, that goes beyond what our charge is. Our charge is about saving the planet. They have in there things like single payer and, what is it, guaranteed income? Nancy Pelosi, a woman who agrees with you on 90% of all political issues, looked at your grand plan and effectively said, what is this nonsense? He displayed the financial models. Independent economic analyses of the Green New Deal, that's full implementation ranged from $51 to $93 trillion over 10 years. That is more money than the entire national debt. That is more than the combined gross domestic product of every single country on Earth except the United States and China. And your frequently asked questions, his brilliant answer to the question of how to pay for it was, and I quote, the Green New Deal is a massive investment program, not an expenditure. In other words, you had absolutely no answer. You just relabeled the word cost. Ocasio-Cortez finally fired back, finding her strongest moment in the grueling hearing, the moment her die-hard supporters in the gallery had been waiting for. Mr. Shapiro, the cost of inaction on global climate change is estimated at, I don't dispute that climate change is real, or that it requires serious policy responses, Shapiro said, slicing through her sentence with surgical precision. What I dispute is that the appropriate response to a real, complex problem is a childish plan that your own party absolutely refuses to vote for, that your own speaker openly mocked, that your own chief of staff admitted wasn't really about the climate, that promises to pay taxpayers' money to people who simply refuse to work, and that was so poorly, incompetently drafted that your own office had to delete its frequently asked questions document within 24 hours of publishing it. He didn't blink. The planet deserves a real, actionable plan, Congresswoman. What you offered was a glorified press release with a price tag the size of the solar system. The hard-working families in this country deserve much better than a climate plan that promises to pay lazy people, replace every building in America, eliminate all airplanes, and I still cannot believe I am saying this out loud in a United States congressional hearing, get rid of farting cows. The people deserve real policy. You gave them cheap performance art. Shapiro opened the final section of his binder. The tab was blood red. Congresswoman, your Twitter bio proudly states 100% people funded. No corporate PAC money. That is your brand. That is the absolute foundation of your political identity. The idea that you are different, that you are clean, that you absolutely refuse to play the dirty, dark money game of Washington. He looked up. Let's test that theory. He brought up a series of complex FEC filings on the monitors. Your chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, founded 2 political action committees, Justice Democrats PAC and Brand New Congress PAC. He also owned a private, for-profit limited liability company called Brand New Congress LLC. Between 2016 and 2018, the 2 PACs paid Chakrabarty's private company more than $1 million. Every single cent of it was vaguely labeled as strategic consulting. There was absolutely no itemized breakdown of what that massive amount of money was actually used for. He turned the page. The National Legal and Policy Center, a nonpartisan government watchdog group, filed a formal complaint with the Federal Election Commission. Their director, Tom Anderson, said, and I am quoting, "In all my years of studying FEC reports, I've never seen a more ambitious operation to circumvent reporting requirements." He pulled up another quote. Former FEC Commissioner Hans von Spakovsky, who served on the commission for 4 years, reviewed the complaint and concluded there was, quote, unquestionably more than enough evidence to justify the FEC opening a civil investigation, and, quote, enough evidence for the U.S. Justice Department to seriously consider opening a criminal investigation. Shapiro locked eyes with her. Criminal investigation. Those are the words of a former commissioner of the very agency that regulates campaign finance. Speaking directly about your campaign, he pulled up one more financial filing. Separately, the Coolidge-Reagan Foundation filed a second formal complaint, alleging that your boyfriend, Riley Roberts, mysteriously received $6,000 from Chakrabarty S. PAC as a marketing consultant. During the exact same period, the PAC was aggressively paying Chakrabarty S. LLC for strategic consulting for your campaign. He set the documents down flat on the table. Now, you have said, and I want to be entirely fair here, that the FEC ultimately did not pursue enforcement action. That is technically true, but the reason is that the Commission was completely deadlocked, 2-2, purely along partisan lines. A partisan deadlock is not an exoneration, Congresswoman. It is a hung jury, and it is highly worth noting that your Chief of Staff, the man sitting at the very center of these massive financial allegations, abruptly left your office in August 2019, exactly 3 months after the formal complaints were filed. That is either the world's biggest, most convenient coincidence, or it isn't. Then Shapiro turned back to the gallery. I would like to introduce one more individual who submitted sworn testimony to this committee. Mr. Kevin Park. In the 4th row, a young man stood up. He was in his late 20s, slim, and visibly nervous. He walked slowly down to a microphone, specifically set up for public testimony. My name is Kevin Park, he said, his voice thin but remarkably steady. I worked as a finance coordinator for Justice Democrats PAC from September 2017 to March 2018. During that time, I personally processed payment disbursements from the PAC to Brand New Congress LLC. Ocasio-Cortez, as new Chief of Staff, sitting directly behind her, leaned sharply forward. Her legislative director aggressively began texting on a cell phone. In early 2018, I noticed that all disbursements to Brand New Congress LLC were being categorized as strategic consulting. Park continued, but I was processing payments for dozens of totally different types of services: media production, web development, canvassing operations, event logistics, payroll for campaign staff, working on multiple different candidates' campaigns. None of those specific categories ever appeared on our FEC filings. Everything was just lumped together under strategic consulting. He paused, taking a breath. I raised this specific issue with Mr. Chakrabarty in February 2018. I asked him directly why we weren't properly itemizing the different services. He told me, and I wrote it down at the time because it didn't feel right. He said, Just put strategic consulting. It's simpler, and nobody checks. The hearing room erupted in chaos. 3 political reporters stood up simultaneously. A Democratic aide sitting behind Ocasio-Cortez buried her face in her hands. The chairman forcefully banged his gavel, demanding order. "Nobody checks," Shapiro repeated, his voice cutting clearly through the noise. "Just put strategic consulting. Nobody checks. Congresswoman, that is what your own chief of staff told a financial employee about reporting campaign finance expenditures to the Federal Election Commission, the agency that literally exists to ensure transparency in American elections. Nobody checks." Ocasio-Cortez grabbed her microphone, desperate to stop the bleeding. "I had absolutely no knowledge of specific payment categorizations. You were sitting on the board of Justice Democrats when these exact payments were being made." Park stated clearly from the gallery microphone. "Your name is right there on the official FEC filing as a board member. I saw it on the organizational documents. I left the board before you left in June 2018. She shot back. "The payments I processed occurred from September 2017 through March 2018. Park replied calmly. "You were on the board for the entire period I just described." Shapiro didn't need to add a single word. He simply let the brutal math speak for itself. Methodically, Shapiro closed his laptop. He closed his thick binder. He set his pen down neatly on the witness table. When he spoke next, it was entirely from memory. No notes, no screens, no crutches, just a man who had been thoroughly preparing for this exact conversation for 8 long years. "Congresswoman, in August 2018, I politely invited you to a debate. I offered $10,000 to your campaign or to any charity of your absolute choice. 1 hour, any topic, any format. I said, and I am quoting my own words, I would love to have a real conversation with you about the issues. You've noted that you think Republicans are afraid to debate you. Not only am I eager to discuss the issues with you, I'm willing to offer $10,000 for you to come on our Sunday special." He looked deep into her eyes. "Your public response on Twitter to your 8 million followers at the time was this: just like catcalling, I don't owe a response to unsolicited requests from men with bad intentions, and also like catcalling, for some reason they feel entitled to one." He let the quote hang in the air. The room was perfectly, hauntingly still. Catcalling. You compared a polite, public invitation to discuss basic economic policy to a man sexually harassing a frightened woman on the street. And for 8 years, that absurd comparison worked for you. You never debated me. You never debated Candace Owens, who generously offered $100,000 to charity. You never debated any serious conservative in any unscripted, uncontrolled format. He gestured around the grand room. For 8 years, you have operated exclusively in environments where you completely control the clock, the questions, and the final edit. 5-minute congressional questioning rounds where you choose the questions and force the witness to answer yes or no. Instagram live sessions where you handpick the friendly comments to respond to. Fluff interviews where the host completely agrees with your premise before you even finish your first sentence. That is not political discourse, Congresswoman. That is public relations curation. Shapiro stood up. The chairman, stunned, did not object. Shapiro was not tall. He had a slight build, wore a yarmulke, and dressed in a suit that was professional, but clearly not exorbitantly expensive. He looked absolutely nothing like the towering senators and wealthy congressmen who usually dominated these halls of power. He looked exactly like what he was: a civilian, a commentator, a private citizen who had been invited to speak and had decided to speak plainly and truthfully. "So let me put this hearing into its proper context," Shapiro declared, his voice ringing out. Because this is the exact conversation you have been desperately avoiding since 2018. He spoke rapidly from memory, firing each fact like a bullet point delivered at the speed of an auctioneer who had graduated from Harvard Law. 2021. You wear a tax. The rich couture dress to a $35,000 gala. The House Ethics Committee unanimously finds you violated House rules, received impermissible gifts, and paid drastically below market value. 2019. You killed 25,000 jobs in your own district. Average salary, $150,000. Total economic impact, $30 billion. The governor of your own party calls it a lost economic opportunity, and your constituent, sitting right there in that gallery, Maria Santos, says her son was one interview away from a $73,000 career and is now scraping by, making $41,000 at 2 part-time jobs with 0 benefits. 2019. Your signature, defining legislation, the Green New Deal, receives 0 votes in the United States Senate. Your own deleted, frequently asked questions published on your official website promises economic security to people unwilling to work, proposes eliminating air travel, and literally includes the phrase, farting cows. Your own chief of staff admits on the record the plan was never actually about the climate. It was about radically restructuring the American economy, 2017 through 2019. Your campaign and affiliated PACs funnel over $1 million through a dark LLC owned by your chief of staff, categorizing everything vaguely as strategic consulting. A former FEC commissioner calls for a criminal investigation. A former employee just testified under oath that your chief of staff explicitly told him nobody checks. Your chief of staff resigns 3 months after the official complaints are filed. 2018. When I politely offer to discuss any of this with you in a fair, public, unscripted debate, you call it catcalling. He paused and took a deep breath. It was the only pause he had taken in 4 relentless minutes. Congresswoman, I want to say something right now that I genuinely mean, and I want you to hear it without your usual defensiveness. You are incredibly talented. You are arguably the most effective social media communicator in the entire history of American politics. You turned a massive primary upset into a global national brand. You have more followers than most major cable news networks. You can turn a mundane 5-minute questioning round into a 30 million view viral clip faster than anyone else in Washington. His voice grew stern. But social media is not policy. Online followers are not actual constituents. Viral clips are not legislation. And calling every single challenge catcalling and labeling every valid criticism bad intentions doesn't make the criticism magically go away. It just means you never have to bravely answer it. He looked directly at her, his expression unwavering. I have said this before, and I will say it one more time, because it is the only thing I have ever said that truly matters. Facts don't care about your feelings, Congresswoman, and here are the cold, hard facts. You accepted lavish gifts from the rich while wearing a dress that boldly said, "Tax the rich." You killed 25,000 jobs in your own district, and arrogant called it a victory. Your signature climate policy received 0 votes in the Senate. Your campaign funneled $1 million through shady shell companies while you hypocritically lectured America about dark money. And when someone kindly offered to discuss any of this in a fair, open debate, you called it catcalling. He took one deliberate step back from the microphone. Then, he delivered the closing line he had been saving for 8 long years. So here is my updated offer, Congresswoman. I am not offering $10,000 anymore. I am offering what I have always offered. The absolute truth. with the receipts to back it up. The question is the exact same one it has always been. He paused, letting the silence build. Can you handle it? The room hung in suspended animation. 2 seconds. 3. 4. It was the kind of absolute, terrified silence that simply does not exist in congressional hearings. Because congressional hearings are strictly designed to prevent silence. Someone is always talking. Someone is always banging a gavel. Someone is always shuffling important papers. But not now. Ocasio-Cortez finally broke the silence. But she did not break it the way she desperately wanted to. She didn't just reach for her microphone, she grabbed it, leaning forward with a raw, unbridled intensity that far exceeded anything the hearing room had ever seen from her. Her voice was much louder than the microphone required, louder than the room required, and much louder than she had originally intended. "You don't get to lecture me about inequality," she practically shouted. "You sit there in your $220 million media company, and you arrogantly lecture me about working people. You've never lived in real poverty. You don't know what it's like to constantly worry about rent. You don't know what it's like to given." The chairman's wooden gavel came down with a sharp crack. The gentlewoman's time has. "I'm not finished," AOC screamed. Her aide nervously touched her arm to calm her down, but she violently pulled it away. This man, this commentator, has never served a single actual constituent. He's never knocked on a single door. He's never sat crying with a family that just lost their health care. He sits comfortably in a studio in Nashville and heavily profits from. The gavel came down again, louder this time. "The gentlewoman's time has expired. The witness will." "He doesn't know what it's like," she yelled. The third gavel strike echoed through the chamber. The room was practically vibrating. The stoic C-SPAN cameras, which were specifically designed to capture procedural monotony, were now capturing something they had never, ever captured from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez: a total, catastrophic loss of control. Her voice had visibly cracked on the very last sentence. It was not a fake, dramatic crack for the cameras. It was a real, painful crack. The crack of someone who had been flawlessly performing strength and unbothered composure for 8 years and had just forcefully collided with a surface she could not perform her way through. Shapiro patiently waited for the echo of the gavel to completely die away. Then he spoke. He spoke quietly, almost gently, which somehow made the moment infinitely worse for her. "Congresswoman, I grew up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Burbank, California," he said softly. "My father worked as a composer, and my mother worked in television. We were not wealthy by any stretch. I wore the exact same pair of shoes to school every day, until they literally fell apart. I skipped 2 grades, not because my parents could afford fancy tutors, but because the local public library was completely free. I went to UCLA on a scholarship. I went to Harvard Law School on heavy student loans that I painstakingly paid off over 11 long years." He didn't raise his voice, he actually lowered it. "Don't ever tell me I don't know what it's like. I just don't use my past as a cheap shield to avoid accountability." The gallery absolutely erupted. It was not cheering. It was something much more complicated and profound. It was a massive release of pressure that had been building since the very first minute of the hearing. Shapiro's supporters in the room were highly restrained. They knew better than to hoot and holler in a formal congressional hearing, but the deep, resonant sound they made was unmistakable. It was the collective, heavy exhale of millions of people who had been waiting 8 years to finally hear those exact words spoken directly to her face. Ocasio-Cortez fell back heavily into her leather chair. Her hands were pressed flat on the dais. Her new chief of staff was standing directly behind her, one hand resting on the back of her chair, his mouth close to her ear. frantically whispering something she wasn't even processing. Her legislative director had completely stopped texting. The progressive staffers wearing the Tax the Rich t-shirts in the gallery were no longer smiling. The ranking Republican member leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Chairman, based on the highly concerning testimony presented here today, particularly the sworn testimony of Mr. Testimony Park regarding the fraudulent categorization of PAC expenditures, I am formally requesting that the Office of Congressional Ethics immediately reopen its investigation into Representative Ocasio-Cortez campaign finance practices with a specific, targeted focus on whether massive disbursements were deliberately mischaracterized to illegally avoid federal reporting requirements." A Democratic member spoke next. It was not a progressive radical, but a moderate Democrat from Virginia who had narrowly won her district by just 3 points. "I think we should all take the testimony presented here today very seriously. Every single member of this elected body has a moral obligation to meet the exact same standards we so loudly set for others." It was not a defense of AOC. It was not a direct attack. It was something much worse than both. It was a fellow Democratic colleague publicly declining to protect her. In the brutal world of Washington politics, silence is a deadly weapon. And on the Democratic side of the dais, the silence was absolutely deafening. The hearing officially ended at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time. By 4:00 p.m., every single video clip service, social media platform, and news aggregator on the planet was carrying the exact same explosive footage. The clip that detonated first was the ending. "Can you handle it?" 4 simple words, delivered calmly by a civilian in a yarmulke to the most famous, untouchable congresswoman in America. It was shared a staggering 12 million times in the first 3 hours alone. The caption that spread the fastest across the internet was simply 8 years. The second viral clip was Maria Santos. "My son was one interview away from a $73,000 career." That heartbreaking clip bypassed the usual partisan bubbles, moving rapidly through working-class communities not conservative or liberal, just working class with the raw velocity of a fundamental truth that real people recognized in their own difficult lives. Within 24 hours, Maria Santos had been interviewed by 14 major news outlets, and her son, Diego, had become a national symbol for every single American who had watched a life-changing opportunity vanish simply because of a wealthy politician's out-of-touch ideology. The third clip was AOC's total loss of control. "You don't know what it's like," her voice violently cracking. The heavy gavel coming down 3 rapid times. Her panicked aide reaching for her arm. The shocking moment she screamed, "I'm not finished," at the chairman of her own committee. For 8 years, AOC's untouchable brand had been built entirely on perfect composure under intense fire. The viral clips where she calmly dismantled nervous witnesses, the cozy Instagram lives where she cooked dinner and casually explained socialist policy. The committee moments where she asked a question so devastatingly framed that the witness had no answer. That brand was built entirely on absolute control. And in 30 seconds, that control was completely gone. Not because Shapiro had yelled at her, but because he had spoken quietly. Because he had said, "I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment," in a voice so remarkably calm that it made her panicked shouting sound exactly like what it was. A desperate person who had entirely run out of arguments and was now running purely on volume. The fourth clip was Kevin Park's damning testimony. Just put strategic consulting, nobody checks. It spread like wildfire through government transparency organizations, campaign finance watchdogs, and elite political journalism circles like a massive, undeniable confirmation of everything they had quietly suspected, but couldn't legally prove. Common Cause issued a scathing statement within 4 hours, calling for an immediate, thorough, and aggressive investigation of the shady payment structure Park had described. Fox News ran the hearing wall to wall under a massive chyron that read, "The catcall Shapiro dismantles AOC in her own committee." CNN, in a rare moment of undeniable editorial discomfort, led with the headline, "Contentious Hearing Raises Ethical Questions for Ocasio-Cortez." MSNBC's coverage was notably painfully muted. There was no spirited panel discussion. There was no extended analysis. Just a straight, dry news report that lasted exactly 4 minutes before quickly moving on to a boring segment about infrastructure spending. The most devastating commentary, however, came not from the political right, but from CNN's Van Jones, a prominent progressive who had fiercely defended AOC dozens of times on his evening panel. Jones said something that his Republican co-panelists didn't even try to interrupt, because they knew his silence would be infinitely more effective than their agreement. "She walked blindly into a trap she set entirely for herself," Jones said, shaking his head. "She thought she was going to grill a hostile witness. She didn't realize she was actually debating Ben Shapiro, and she has never truly debated anyone, not him, not anyone. Her entire political career has been built safely inside highly controlled environments, and today she was finally in an uncontrolled one, and it painfully showed." His co-panelist, a veteran former Democratic strategist, added, "The catcalling line was smart and trendy in 2018. It is toxic in 2026. You cannot spend 8 years calling every single debate challenge harassment and then completely lose your composure the very first time someone actually challenges you under oath. It validates everything her critics have always said about her avoiding real accountability." Kevin O'Leary, the famous Shark Tank investor who had bitterly feuded with AOC over the disastrous Amazon deal for years, posted a fiery video that evening. "I have been saying this since 2019. AOC is incredible at killing jobs. She killed 25,000 of them with one stupid tweet, and then literally threw a party." Today, Ben Shapiro finally presented the receipt, and a grieving mother from Queens delivered the final bill. The internet supercut was inevitable. Someone at the Daily Wire, though Shapiro himself firmly denied any personal involvement, edited a 45-second video that went viral faster than anything in the actual hearing itself. It opened with a young AOC in 2018 smugly saying, "Just like catcalling, I don't owe a response to unsolicited requests from men with bad intentions." Then it smash cut to a rapid-fire, merciless montage, Shapiro citing the ethics report, Maria Santos crying, the farting cows quote from the deleted. Frequently asked questions. Kevin Park testifying, "Nobody checks." AOC's voice cracking as she screamed, "You don't know what it's like." Then Shapiro's quiet, steady voice, "I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Burbank." And the final, devastating frame. "Can you handle it?" 45 seconds, 58 million views in 48 hours. It instantly became the most watched congressional hearing clip in American history. The official Democratic response was a masterclass in strategic political retreat. Not a single progressive member of Congress went on camera to defend AOC. Not one. The Congressional Progressive Caucus issued a weak, vague statement about the general importance of civil discourse in congressional hearings, which was widely interpreted not as a defense, but as a subtle criticism of AOC's embarrassing loss of composure, dressed up as a plea for civility. Behind closed doors, two sources told Politico that senior Democrats expressed furious frustration that AOC had handed the Republicans a massive weapon by losing her temper. She could have just sat there, taken the hits, and moved on. One senior aide grumbled. Instead, she gave them exactly the clip they wanted. "I may, not finished, is going to be playing in every single Republican attack ad in 2026. The squad, what little remained of it after suffering heavy electoral losses in 2022 and 2024, was entirely silent. Not supportive, not critical, just dead silent. Ilhan Omar posted a generic tweet about housing policy. Rashida Tlaib posted about Palestine. Neither of them mentioned AOC's disastrous hearing. In the tight ecosystem of progressive politics, where public solidarity is the ultimate currency, the absolute absence of solidarity was a massive political bankruptcy. The ethics referral was officially confirmed by the committee's Seth ranking member right before the close of business. The Office of Congressional Ethics quickly acknowledged receipt and firmly stated it would review the referral in due course. Prominent legal analysts noted on primetime television that Park's sworn testimony, if corroborated by internal financial records, could blow the doors off questions about whether PAC expenditures were deliberately miscategorized to illegally avoid federal disclosure requirements. The phrase, "tax the rich," became a brutal meme overnight. Photoshopped versions of the famous Met Gala dress appeared everywhere across social media. Some read, "Pay your bills." Others read the ethics report." Some just said, "Nobody checks." The original dress, which had been designed as a bold statement of progressive defiance, had officially become a mocking symbol of the massive gap between elite rhetoric and working-class reality. The exact gap that Ben Shapiro, armed with nothing but a laptop and a stack of documents, had spent 4 hours methodically measuring. The hashtag number, the catcall, trended globally for 72 consecutive hours. The name stuck permanently because of the sheer irony. The woman who had arrogantly dismissed a debate as catcalling had just discovered the hard way that the catcaller had come fully prepared with the receipts she had spent 8 years avoiding. Through it all, Ben Shapiro did not do a victory lap. He did what he always did. He simply went home and recorded his daily podcast. Sitting in the Daily Wire studio in Nashville, in the exact same chair he sat in every weekday, he opened his show with the same fast, dry, slightly amused, and relentlessly factual cadence he used every single day. "So, today, I finally got my long-awaited debate with AOC," he began. "It only took 8 years and a federal congressional subpoena." He paused to take a slow sip of water. "She is smart. I have said this before, and I will say it again. She is smart. She is entirely wrong about virtually everything, but she is very smart. The problem has never been her intelligence. The problem is that she has spent 8 years trapped in a curated ecosystem where no one ever looks at her and says, 'That number is mathematically wrong,' and actually means it, where every clip is carefully curated, where every media interview is friendly, where every single valid criticism is instantly dismissed as sexism or racism or catcalling." He took another brief pause. Today, for 20 solid minutes, she was finally trapped in a room where someone said, "That is wrong." And that person had the actual paperwork to prove it. And she couldn't handle it, not because she is stupid, but because she has never, ever had to. There is a massive difference between being fundamentally unable to take a punch and simply never having been punched. She has never been punched, politically speaking. Today, she finally was. He leaned back in his chair. "One more thing. People keep frantically asking me how I feel. Social media is apparently blowing up. The clip has 40 million views or whatever. How do I feel? Honestly, I feel the exact same way I felt back in 2018 when I made the original debate offer. I don't want to destroy AOC. I want her to be better. I want all of our elected politicians to be better. I want them to stand proudly behind their numbers, bravely defend their policies in open, public debate, and stop hiding behind cowardly social media curation and 5-minute questioning rounds where they completely control the clock." He looked directly into the camera lens. "The offer still stands, Congresswoman. Any time, any format, any charity. The only thing I have ever asked for is a real conversation. You childishly called it catcalling, but maybe, after today, you'll finally call it what it actually is. Accountability." He smoothly moved on to the next news story. The show ran its normal 45 minutes. He talked about international trade policy, a complex Supreme Court case, and a local controversy involving a school board in Michigan. AOC occupied exactly 7 minutes of his show. No more, no less. It was the exact same amount of time he would give any other major story, because that was the entire point. For AOC, the congressional hearing was a career-shattering earthquake. For Shapiro, it was just a Tuesday. Meanwhile, in Queens, New York, Diego Santos came home from his exhausting afternoon delivery shift at 6:45 p.m. He was still wearing his heavy work jacket, a cheap black nylon shell with the faded logo of a logistics company that paid him $19 an hour, with zero benefits and zero retirement. His mother was sitting quietly at the small kitchen table, her phone propped up against a coffee mug, watching the hearing clip for the 4th time. She didn't say anything when he walked in. She just silently turned the phone toward him. He stood there and watched. He watched Shapiro coldly state the numbers. 25,000 jobs. Average salary, $150,000. He watched his own mother stand up bravely in the gallery. He watched himself become a national news story. He did the math in his head. He always did the math. Not because he was a trained accountant, but because math was the only thing in the world that didn't lie to him. If he had actually gotten that Amazon job at $73,000 back in 2019, he would have been making somewhere around $90,000 by now. 6 years in, with regular raises and promotions, he would have real health insurance, the kind where you can actually afford to go to the dentist, not the kind where you desperately avoid the doctor because the deductible is higher than your monthly rent. He would have a growing retirement account. He would have his own apartment. Maybe not in Queens anymore, rents being what they were, but somewhere that wasn't his mother's cramped living room where he still slept on a lumpy fold-out couch that was older than he was. He thought deeply about the interview he never got to attend. The callback from Amazon's HR department, the printed email his proud mother had stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the Puerto Rican flag. "Congratulations, we'd like to schedule you for a second interview." He was 18 years old. He had carefully ironed a dress shirt he borrowed from his uncle. He had nervously practiced his interview answers in the bathroom mirror. And then the devastating headline came, "Amazon pulls out of New York." And his mother quietly took the email off the refrigerator and put it away in a drawer. She never said anything about it again. He never said anything about it. It just went into the dark drawer, and the drawer closed, and 6 hard years passed them by. Diego gently gave his mother back her phone. He didn't say a single word. He just went to take a quick shower. He had his brutal evening shift at the Bronx warehouse, starting at 9 o'clock. The warehouse did not have air conditioning. It paid $19 an hour. It was definitely not $73,000 a year with full benefits. But it was a job, and Diego Santos had learned a very hard lesson at the age of 18, taught to him directly by a wealthy congresswoman who supposedly represented his neighborhood. Jobs were fragile things that could easily be taken away from you by powerful people who would never, ever have to work them. Down in Arlington, Virginia, where Amazon's massive HQ2 had actually been built, in the gleaming, modern glass towers of National Landing, a 26-year-old software developer named Jason Reyes was happily finishing his workday. He had grown up in Hunts Point in the Bronx, just 2 blocks away from AOC's district office. His mother still lived there, in the exact same small apartment he had grown up in, right above a noisy bodega that changed names every 3 years, but somehow always smelled exactly the same. He had worked hard, gone to CUNY, studied computer science, graduated with high honors, and eagerly applied to Amazon in 2021 when they were massively expanding the Virginia headquarters. He got the job, starting salary $89,000. He packed his bags and moved to Virginia. He watched the viral hearing clip on his phone during his smooth, quiet metro ride home. He watched Shapiro accurately describe the 25,000 stolen jobs. He watched Maria Santos cry. He thought about his own mother and how she had cried when he told her he was moving to Virginia, not because she was sad, but because she was incredibly proud, and because she knew, deep down, that if Amazon had come to Queens like it was supposed to, he would have been 15 minutes away instead of 4 hours. He called her. "Ma, you see this? They were talking about the Amazon thing." He looked out the clean window of the metro at the sprawling Virginia skyline, the massive cranes, the endless construction, the beautiful glass towers that should have been built in Queens. That could have been me, walking to work from your apartment. Instead, I'm 1,000 miles away. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Me, Joe, you have the job. That's what really matters." "I know, Ma. I just wish I could walk to your house for dinner on a Tuesday night, instead of having to fly home once a month." She didn't say anything to that. Through the phone, he could clearly hear her television playing in the background, still looping the hearing coverage. He heard Shapiro's voice, small and tiny, through her phone-S speaker, 25,000 jobs. And then silence. And then his mother, very quietly, said, 25,000 families, mijo. That's what I think about." Up in a small dorm room at Columbia University, a 20-year-old political science major named Priya Desai sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. She had a massive AOC poster proudly displayed on her wall. It was the famous one from the 2018 campaign, the iconic Shepherd Fairy-style illustration with the word "courage" boldly printed underneath. She had bought it during her freshman year. She had eagerly interned for a progressive PAC the previous summer. She was, by every possible metric, a true believer in the movement. She watched the congressional hearing video 3 times in a row, not because she wanted to see AOC lose, but because she desperately wanted to find the rebuttal. She wanted to find the exact moment where AOC brilliantly dismantled Shapiro's conservative argument. The moment where the math he cited was proven wrong, where the ethics report was shown to be taken out of context, where the Amazon job numbers were exposed as misleading. She couldn't find it, not because she didn't look hard enough, but because it simply wasn't there. The House Ethics Committee report was undeniably real. The 25,000 lost jobs were real. The deleted Green New Deal frequently asked questions about farting cows was real. Kevin Park's devastating testimony about nobody checks was specific, dated, documented, and real. And AOC's emotional, screaming response, "You don't know what it's like," was not a factual rebuttal. It was a desperate deflection. And Priya, who had spent 2 years extensively studying political rhetoric, deeply knew the difference. She didn't tear the poster down. Not yet. But she quietly stood up and turned her desk so it faced a completely different wall. Meanwhile, inside the Rayburn House office building, on the 3rd floor, in a spacious office that looked out over Independence Avenue, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat completely alone behind her large wooden desk. The heavy door was firmly closed. Her staff had all gone home for the night. Her phone lay face down on the desk, violently buzzing with a frantic frequency that strongly suggested the world desperately wanted to talk to her much more than she wanted to talk to it. On her glowing computer screen, paused exactly at the 37-second mark, it was a video from August 2018. It was herself, younger, before Congress. before the squad, before the Met Gala and the Green New Deal and the casual Instagram lives and the 13 million adoring followers, she was standing confidently in front of a camera, reading a tweet she had just proudly posted. She was laughing. She was confident. She was absolutely certain. Just like catcalling, she heard her younger self say, "I don't owe a response to unsolicited requests from men with bad intentions." She remembered exactly how good it had felt in that moment. The tweet had gone massively viral in mere hours. The mainstream media had absolutely loved it. Her loyal followers had treated it like holy scripture. She had successfully turned a simple debate invitation into a powerful feminist statement. And no one, not one single person in her entire orbit, not one staffer, not one journalist, not one friend, had dared to say, "Maybe you should actually take the debate," because everyone in her insulated world had completely agreed with her. Engaging with Ben Shapiro was supposedly beneath her. Debating a conservative commentator would only elevate him. Ignoring the challenge was the ultimate power move. For 8 long years, she had truly believed that. Now, she sat in the dark of her office, with the door closed and the phone buzzing, and she thought about the 25,000 jobs she had proudly called a victory. She thought about the $35,000 dress she hadn't paid for. She thought about the frequently asked questions document she had hastily deleted. She thought about the $1 million her chief of staff had quietly funneled through an LLC while she loudly tweeted about dark money. She thought about the man in the yarmulke who had stood calmly in her committee room and asked her, "Can you handle it?" And the brutal 30 seconds after that question, when she had answered him not with facts or words, but with a cracked, screaming voice and a wooden gavel coming down 3 times. She thought about Maria Santos, about Diego, about the $73,000, about the life-changing interview that never happened. Slowly, she reached out and closed the video window. She picked up her phone and turned it face up. 212 unread notifications. She put it back down on the desk. For the first time in 8 years, she had absolutely no clever clip to post. She had called it catcalling, a polite debate invitation, a conversation about economic policy, a $10,000 offer to charity. She had confidently called all of it catcalling, acting as if differing ideas were harassment, as if difficult questions were physical threats, as if the simple democratic act of saying, "Let's talk about this," was something a powerful elected woman needed to be protected from, rather than prepared for. But here is the painful thing about catcalls. They are ultimately empty. They vanish into the loud noise of the street, meaningless and entirely forgotten by the time you reach the next corner. Facts are different. Facts do not vanish. Facts do not care if you boldly block them on Twitter, or lazily dismiss them as bad intentions, or run from them for 8 long years. Facts wait. And in a hearing room in Washington, on a Tuesday in March, the facts had finally caught up.